Hello everybody and welcome to another Houdini tutorial. My name is Kate and today we are going to be exploring the world of crystals and doing that with Quartz and also Solaris. So today, as you can see here, I have three different takes in front of you of the same crystal. Two that have kind of more different distinct color variations and the middle being like a true pure kind of opal quartz that's unprocessed that you would find like naturally in the wild. But for all of these little quartz renders, we've also added like a bioluminescence option to them. And I thought it might be cool to add that so it could add its own distinct form of character to the rocks that we're creating today. Our tutorial today will consist of going through COPS and then jumping straight into Solaris for the modeling and also the rendering. So for this tutorial, what you're going to do is create three distinct nodes in your object level view. You're going to create, okay, sorry, my bad. Get rid of this. So when we dive into our quartz cop here, we're going to want to drop down a material preview. So you'll just need to type in preview material and select this one and drop it down here because we need somewhere to preview our material. We're going to make sure our division size is 300 just to give us enough resolution to work. And from there, we're going to move forward. I always get super nervous when I work with cops because it used to be really unstable. So I really highly recommend you go down here to autosave and turn that on. We're going to move on to creating our pattern. Because I want a higher resolution, well, more 4K resolution in my textures, I'm starting off with a size ref. So all of the sizes of my textures are going to be based off of the size ref. The next thing I'm going to do is turn on resolution here and adjust this to 2048 by 2048, which you can find down here. I'm also going to turn on 32-bit and then I should be good enough. The next I'm going to do is lay down a fractal noise. So we're going to get a fractal noise that looks like this. You're going to just do some basic adjustments. This is really up to you and what you feel like, but I really highly recommend you stick to these parameter values. So we have amplitude 1, center 1, noise contrast, and we've adjusted the element size to be somewhere around 0.16, and just play with the fractalness and adjust the roughness. And that's pretty much it. And now this is the base noise that we're going to base everything off of in this texture. The next node we're going to use is something called heat distort. So heat distort over here was going to create some really ragged terrain looking textures using our fractal noise. Heat distort is relatively new for Houdini 21, and it's a very useful node for getting these like natural, like opalescent swirls in the texture that you're looking for. So we're going to use distortion, play with the element size, angle, and then we're going to go down here to base distortion, keeping those on the regular settings. Our detailed distortion here, crank it to 10, and make sure we have our blur source on, and that's pretty much it. Because once again, we are not animating this, is going to be more of a static texture. We're going to make sure animation is turned off on heat distortion. Right now I'm on frame 1, but if you can see also, if you like the pattern, this current frame is on, just keep an eye on it. You might have to freeze frame it. The next thing we're going to do is increase the overall contrast or flatten the overall contrast of these shapes. So here we go. We are going to close the color contrast, compress it a little bit. Contrast center 0.359 and red 0.9. Now we can continue on from here and add our color into our texture. For this little tutorial here, I've set up 3 different color ramps because quartz comes in a variety of colors. You've got these like goldy rustic white tones that you'll see in like a traditional quartz. So I'll show you the corresponding render right now. So this quartz here it corresponds to this yellow color pattern. So you can see there's these yellow highlights here, and that's coming from the yellow diffuse texture. I've also created a blue ramp, and this blue ramp corresponds to this kind of blue rock texture if you want to go like this pure kind of alien blue. And I've also done this pink texture here, which corresponds to this quartzy pink, which makes it more pop and I think kind of fake looking, I'm gonna be honest, but if you're heading in that direction, this is kind of the tonal shift that you need to go in. I'm going to go back, I backed up to the gold one, and I'm just going to show everybody my settings here. So here I have on the ramp. I'm going to skim through them really quickly. And then for blue, these are my settings. And then for pink, this is my setting over here. Now, once you're happy with your color and you've chosen which color you want to settle with, I'm going to go gold for this tutorial. I'm going to go over here to my RAW image output, type in diffuse, and just choose. Usually I would add a null, but here I'm just going to drag and drop into gold there. I'm going to save, and I'm also going to hit render to disk in background. So now that we're here and we've successfully made our diffuse, what we also need to do is make the other corresponding maps that we will need to make our quartz look like quartz. So the next step is to create our roughness map and also something that will control our specular as well. So we're going to take our fractal noise and then invert it with this invert node. So we're just going to keep this on the full effect like that. And then we're going to move on to merging this with another layer of noise. So half of this tutorial is just going to be layering noise with noise because we want more breakup. We want independence between the two maps. We want some sort of differential that kind of overall looks good. So the next thing I'm going to do is take this multiply node and multiply this invert against some pre-made noise that I'm going to show you now. So this pre-made noise, I'm going to use phaser noise. So this phaser noise, if you've never used phaser noise, this may or may not work with OpenCL on your computer. So if you don't have that installed, I highly recommend that you do install it so Houdini can work properly. But for phaser noise, all we're really doing here is just decreasing the tile size, and we're giving this a really weird, just kind of distorted effect. If I turn this off, you can see that doesn't do too much, but that's what we're doing right here. You can see if I play with it, it changes the stripes. We just want to make these really tiny. Then what we're going to do is distort it with a heat distortion. In some areas we can see those lines, and then some areas we've gotten a fully distorted map. So that's pretty cool. So the black areas, there's obviously going to be no roughness, and then in the whiter areas there's going to be some level of roughness. So that's pretty cool. So once you have those two, you multiply them together and you'll bring them together to have something that looks like this. So just back to this heat distortion 1 second. If I expand this, I've just changed my distortion scale to 10, and these are just the default settings for everything. So now that we have our multiply here, we're going to drop down a RAW image preview, and we're going to say roughness. It's also going to throw spec for me. So I'm going to roughness spec like that. Then we just drag and drop, and there we go. We hit render to disk, and there we go. Now the next thing to do is take our roughness and plug it into our normals. So what we're going to do over here is do a height to normal, which is going to take your height map or your roughness map and convert it to a normal map. So you'll get something that looks like this. I've turned down the height scale here from 1 to 0.5 because I find with rocks, and also plus given some personal feedback, that you don't want too strong of a normal, otherwise it's going to look weird. Then you're going to convert this to normal, and you get something that looks like it could be part of a Barbie movie. Then the next thing you're going to do is drop down your RAW and rinse and cycle and repeat, and type in normal, and drag and drop, and there we go. We have 3 maps done. And also at any point, if you want to preview what's going on, what you can do over here is just start connecting this to your preview material. So if I have roughness and specular over here, I'm going to plug it into my roughness, and then my specular, and then I have my color over here. We're going gold, so we're going to plug that into base color. I also use my base color maps for controlling my specular color and things like that. So if I plug this into the preview material, we're not going to see a lot. It's going to look really ugly up until we get our opacity maps working, but that is basically what you're going to have. What you can also do in the meantime is organize your node tree, so put your little network boxes around everything to make sure everything doesn't get too messy. And this is a really good rule of thumb as an artist, is as you progress through your build, you constantly want to just tidy things up. It's easier to tidy things up as you progress through your build versus revisiting your build and then tidying it up from there. Actually, let's do purple because this is like the beginning of, there we go. So the next thing we're going to do is create our emission map, or a base emission map, and also our emission color so we can get those really cool blue effects. So let's jump right into that. So the first thing we're going to do is go back to our base noise, so the fractal here, and we're going to go over here and just click Grunge Aurora. This is a really cool node. It just grunges everything up. So we've created this kind of streaking effect here. So you can see I played with the center, I played with the element size, the distortion strength, the streak weight, and everything else in between. Then I transformed it so only an edge of our map is going to glow, And this transform settings are right here. The next thing we're going to do is blur it. So make a good fall off for your blur. So blur everything. You can make this bigger if you feel like it, or you can make it smaller. And then we're going to take this and multiply it against some noise so we get some breakup. So I'm using a fractal noise to do that. And over here I have mono, range, pattern. Over here I've made it slightly smaller. And then fractal is roughness and max octaves. And together you can see it keeps, that color in those zones while also breaking it up a little bit. And now we're going to add a ramp to make this blue glow. So these are the settings that I've used for this blue glow ramp. You can see we have a base color of black, and then we slowly build these blue hues out of it, and ta-da! You get this. And so if you want more brightness, you just bring down this one a little bit, like that. Cool. So now that we have that, we have our multiply and ramp. We're going to go and drop down 2 image outputs. We're going to say this is emission and this is emission color. You're just going to connect the two like this, and you're going to hit render. And now you should have everything you need, texture-wise to get started in Houdini. And then we're going to, so you should have these four distinct sections of your map plus the input. So the next stage of our process is going to go into our lab network and create our stone setup so we can render this and have a great time. So we're going to dive into our karma or Solaris context, and we are going to set up our karma, drop down your karma, call this render whatever you like. Doesn't really matter, but we're going to call this quartz. So the next thing we're going to do is create the actual physical quartz. So we're going to put down a SOP create, and this is where the quartz is going to come from. So we're going to go that quartz model. Below it is going to be our material network. So I know our materials. And then we're also going to have our lights and also anything else we want to add later on. We'll come back to the lights after we place all our materials down in the scene. So let's go inside here to our SOP crate and get started. Okay, so the first thing we're going to actually do before we model our crystal is have somewhere to put the crystal in the scene. So we're going to put down a grid, and we're going to do a 9 by almost like 10 by 10. And then we're going to do a 15 in this axis and just do a rows and columns 50 by 50. You can go copy parameter, paste relative references if you feel like it. Then we're going to put down a bend. So I'm going to adjust our bend angle. I'm going to do a bend angle of 90. Capture length of 6.38, so you can round that up to 4 if you want. That really won't make a difference. And then from there, we're going to add our attributes, so Houdini knows to put, the ground material on the ground and nowhere else. So after our bend, we're going to put our auto UV, so our labs auto UV. And then we're going to drop down a name node, and we're going to put this as path ground. And then a little null here that says background, and this is going to be the background for everything that we film today. So ideally we're going to make a rock right here and then put a camera around it, and there we go. So there is how our background looks, and we're just going to put a little network box around it and put it to the side. So the next thing we're going to start with is just a way to start modeling crystals in our rock. I'm going to be starting out with this platonic solid. So just this platonic small solid. It's going to be in the middle of world space. I'm going to scatter some points, so not a lot, just a little. So that doesn't look more than 20 points there. Using a point separation of 0.14. Clipping it so there's no points below 0, 0. And adding p-scale to our points. This is a really critical step, as we're going to be using p-scale here to copy our quartz diamonds or pillars onto these points, and it's really important that we have them, looking the way that they do. So these are the settings for that. Then we're going to have our attribute wrangle here, and we're going to use orient at rand pt num to create some randomized orientation on this, and then we're going to blast away any points that might be in the way. In this case, I just wanted to blast one of the points away. As you'll see later, it might be somewhat in a position where I just don't want it to be there, but I'll turn it off for now until we copy our geometry on so you can actually see the purpose of this blast node. Alrighty, so now we're getting into the modeling of the rock bit. So I can lie and saying how this would predetermine where our crystals went on the rock, but realistically we're creating the rock first. So here we're going to work on this little kind of oval essence shaped sphere. And we are going to do a radius by 0.5, 0.5. Then we're going to distort the mountain with a mountain. Very easy. You're not doing much. You're just transforming the amplitude by 0.5. Element size 0.34. You can round that up to 0.35. It won't make much of a difference. And then we have fractal, max octave, linearity, roughness, and then you're good to go. Then we're going to add another mountain, and we're going to keep the amplitude the same at 0.25. We're going to adjust the element size for 0.35 and play with the hybrid terrain. We're just creating some variation in the shape and doing that by layering two different types of noise. Then we're going to use edge damage. So this edge damage is going to create this really unique kind of shape to our rock that you kind of see here, which is cool. I'm using edge damage. When you load it up in Houdini, it's going to be really heavy. Don't panic. This is how you fix it. So we're going to change the method from VDB Boolean to colors. Then we're going to use amount 0.94. Then we're going to do samples, relax, contrast, and make sure your ramp node is enabled. We're going to use voxelization, just increase that to 0.015, smoothing iterations per piece, and then blur. And you should get something that looks like this. The next thing you're going to do is put some UVs on that bad boy. Without our UVs, we can't texture anything, and without any UVs, we're kind of screwed. So from here, we're going to take this rock, copies the points, and ta-da! We have this rock. Look at that. Very volcanic in its shape, and I kind of like it. Here is a little tip of like why I have this blast node over here. So let's say if there's a rock in particular that's poking out in a direction that you just don't like, remember that you have a bunch of points over here that control the position and placement of your rocks. So if there's one you don't like, you can just blast it away by selecting the point it's attached to. So here I'm okay with how this looks. In the future, if there's something that you just don't like, then you can blast it away. All right, so this is looking pretty good. I'm going to put this in its own network box just so we have it out of the way and organized and things like that. And we're going to save. And once again, go to edit, make sure you have autosave enabled. If you do not, you are going to suffer. So now that we have all those done, let's move on to the next step, which is making the crystals that are going to stick out of this rock. The first way we're going to create our crystal structures is to create a crystal-like shape. So we're going to use a tube. So radius scale is 0.1. We're going to add end caps. We're going to make it a polygon, and we're going to add vertex normals. And then you're going to get something that looks like this. So right beside this tube, before we merge things together, we're going to build a platonic solid. So we're going to build a heavy platonic solid that looks something like this. It's going to be a dodecahedron. And we're going to adjust our normals like this so the normals are fixed, because if we don't do this, things might happen. Then we're going to drop down a transform. We're just going to shrink it down, make sure this, this shape is in world space, rotate it a little bit, do whatever we need to do. And then we're going to Boolean the shape with our rock. When you Boolean it, you should get something that looks like this. So you should have the Boolean on the intersect node here. But why does it look like this? Is because inside this tube, we have this tube, and I'm going to ghost our platonic solid. You'll get something that looks like this. So we're finding the intersection of our kind of tube inside this shape. So that is going to give you your base kind of quartz shape. We're going to have to transform this quartz shape up a little bit. So we're going to use at this Boolean, a transform, and we're going to rotate it by 20, probably like 3.3. There we go. Rotate this to 6. And then we can have a translate of 0.9 or just 5, because that just makes sense. Pivot transform, if you have to do any changes, I find it's good at a 0.01. Then we're going to put some auto UVs on this, so you should have some UVs, and this will help everything look good. Now we can move on to the next step, which is connecting these two things together. So unfortunately, we do need to continue to transform all of these together. So what I'm going to do, just for contingency sake, is I'm going to take this auto UV and move it up here, transform. And then we're going to add another transform, which is basically going to bring everything back to world space. And just shrink this down a little bit to scale 2 by 2. And we're going to play with the pivot rotate as well. So you're going to have something that looks like this. Next thing we're going to do is transform it up again. And this is just going to help with the placement on the points. So next thing we're going to have to do is delete any attributes we don't need. If there's any attributes on this rock that you've put on there that you don't need anymore, you can choose to delete it with this attribute delete. In this case, there's nothing, so I don't need this, but just a keep in mind for housekeeping rules. So now over here where we're going to go back to our rock here, we're going to scatter some points across this rock that we're going to attach these crystals to, and we're going to do that with a series of 3 nodes. We are going to have an attribute paint. So by default, I am using an attribute paint here that is, selecting some random locations across my rock. It's really up to you on how you want to art direct this. What I like to do here is I'm actually going to reset all changes just so I can walk you through what I did. Select fill, select the rock, choose paint, turn this off of fill, and just paint where you want, everything to go. And remember that when you're painting in monotones, this is going to predetermine like how many points get clustered in specific areas. So be convenient about that. And I'm going to go with something that looks like this. And then I'm going to go over here and add a scatter. I'm going to visualize my points. You can see them here. They're scattered all about my rock that have where the main set areas of color are. I'm using it for a count of 58. You can choose as many as you like as long as it doesn't crash your computer. And I'm scattering by density attribute, which is color. Then I'm going to choose P scale because all of our quartz crystals cannot be the same size. And I'm going to use attribute randomize to randomize my P scale, fit, custom ramp. So now the fun part can begin. We have to choose a direction that we'd like these quartz to kind of face in. And the only way that we can do that is by using this methodology that we used over here. Pull these 2 transforms down and drop down an attribute VOP. So this attribute VOP here, I'm going to connect these 2 here and also view my normals. We'll come back to this in a second, but this is basically normal control. So the next thing you're going to do but we're going to come back to this one in a second. I'm just going to color code this as pink so we remember to come back to it. We're going to go to attribute delete here, delete our color before we actually attach our quartz onto it. Otherwise that's not going to be fun. And then we're going to use a copy to points. Copy our quartz to our points. What I recommend you do is connect it to the second input. You'll get something that looks like this. I'm just going to make sure this is at world space. Perfect. And you'll get something that looks like this. Obviously, this doesn't look right. Like if we merge the 2 together, we get something that looks like this. Not ideal. Definitely doesn't look healthy. So what we need to do is go into our end control and start to adjust our normal. So I'm going to pound a point cloud filter and also a point cloud import, point cloud open. That's what we're looking for. So we're going to plug into channel 2 to file and then hit the handle. Just make the search radius really big. We're going to put down a normalize and then subtract from our point position and plug that into normal. And you'll get something crazy looking like this. That's okay. What we need to do here is actually drop down and then extract centroid. We'll do detail. So we're going to find the middle mass and we're going to do transform. So what this is going to do is our little buddy, you can see here, we can now adjust or we drag this point where we'd like our crystals to be. I don't think this transform is actually helping because you can see it's just disperging our points in not like the greatest way. Cool, not cool. Let's turn that back on. So you're just going to push and prod this until you get a formation that you like. So play around, figure out what works for you, what doesn't work for you. One thing we might also have to play around with here is the orient itself of our points. So what I like to do here is we're going to have to orient some things to get them under control. Okay, so we just have to rearrange those. Our quartz model is kind of too big for a rock, so it's pointing out the bottom. So what I would actually do here is drop down a clip and just make sure you add a polyfill because otherwise this is going to get a little bit messy. So we'll do a polyfill though. And there we go. We have quartz and a rock. Oh, it's clipping on the wrong side, so let's make sure it's clipping in the right direction. Looking way better. But you can also see that there's some rock here that's just not ideal in terms of, where the cutoff point is. So we'll just lower that downwards. Awesome. So now that we have our rocks, let's give them a name attribute so we can successfully bring this into Solaris and get this textured and modeled. But before we do that, what we do need to do for both of these is that we need to use something called an RBD material fracture so we can fracture both the rocks and the crystals to have that kind of quartzy structure to it. So what I'm going to do here is drop down basically an unpack if you're packing by instance here on this copy to points, which I am. And then so I can, break my RBD material fracture and bring that into here. So I'll show you in a second the end result we get with the material fracture. So the material fracture that I'm dropping down here is pre-made. but I'm using a scatter points of 0, 23, chipping, detail, here we go. Noise element size, and all we go here. So just a little bit of noise detail. I do find the edge detail and noise detail, depending on the size of your scene, can break and cause a lot of internal fracturing issues, which you can kind of see a little bit here. So just be careful. If that's the case, turn it down or, turn it off. So as you can see, turning it down worked a lot. And if you want to preview your fractures at your down, what you can use is exploded view. And that will be what the internal structure of our crystals look like. So now that we have this rock, let's add our path attribute. So what I'm going to do over here is grab this, place this down here and call this baby quartz or something quartz or whatever I want to call it. A rock. There we go. We have our rock. So what I'm going to do here is just find a good view that, has my background, has my rocks in. I might have to rotate, my background because I feel like it's just the wrong rotational direction. I think that looks good. Now, once you're happy with the placement of your rock, we're going to go up here to camera and do Alt, left click, drop down our camera. Move our camera above our Karma renderer, otherwise that will not work. Make sure they're connected, and there we go. So we should have a basic, if you render this right now, it will look like this. Cool, everything is very straight. I'm not a fan of how naturally straight those quartz look. So what I'm going to do is actually go inside and probably just mess around with the normal control because I'm not a fan of how, straight that looks, things like that. When you look at quartz in real light, oh man, okay. Be right back. And this is why we always turn on autosave, everybody. So now that we're back in here, let's fix our rock orientation issue because that is way too straight. And then let's dive right back into applying our materials, our shaders, and then rendering out this first. I'm going to drop down an attribute wrangle. I'm going to go to copy to points just to make this process a lot faster. And we're going to do orient dot y times equals rand at. So we get something like that. What you can do is also just divide by 4. Instead of multiplying, you can just do an add. That also works. But if we go down here and merge it with everything, you'll notice something interesting. A rando point poking out the bottom, not exactly what I wanted it to do. So maybe that's not ideal. Maybe what we need to do instead is X. Honestly, it looks really natural minus this guy coming out of the floorboards. So what we'll do here is just delete this little farscape guy. And we'll do something like that. And ta-da! We have some randomized quartz crystals and we are good to go. We can start texturing this bad boy. So I'm just going to do a little output and ta-da! Now our merge node is giving us an error mismatch. Let's uncross our wires. Class name N. Not a good sign for us if that's a conflict. Usually when you get that error, it means that, things will not initialize properly, but it's looking like they will. Let's go to Karma CPU, make sure autosave is turned on, and go to Solaris. Now the fun part begins. Let's start with the fun. So let's look through our camera. We have our quartz. Set our quartz model, we should have quartz ground points. If we have rando points and you see rando points appear, we do not like rando points. Rando points are bad. So we want to drop down an add node at the bottom here and say delete unused points. Now inside our material library, we want to do a couple different things. We want to put down our ground material and our quartz. So we need to create 2 materials. We need to do material X, quartz, and ground. And we're going to autofill because we're cool like that. And we're going to assign our quartz, pretty straightforward. Just drag and drop, nothing special. And then we have our materials there. Can minimize this. Look through our Karma CPU. I find that looking through Karma CPU is really good for previewing. Not great if you're doing something that's semi-transparent material like we're creating now. I really find that you are going to face the most potential in completing this render with Karma XPU if you can do it. So the next thing we're going to do is drop down our lights. So I'm going to drop down 2 lights with pre-made settings and we're going to move on to the next step. We forgot to put in our network boxes. Woo woo. So we need to select everything and make sure it's in a friendly network box. Otherwise, the network box gremlins will find us and then we were in bad shape. If you don't believe in them, ask the Sidefx crew, they know all about it. So here we go. We have our network boxes. They are set up. Let's go. Because this is a glowing rock, We want kind of a nighttime lighting, which is why I'm not really putting down in dome light, because I find that with this 2-point lighting, this area light upon area lighting, I get a really good result. So I'm going to walk you through the settings for both lights. For this 2-point lighting setup, all we're doing is transforming it to these values. I'll pause a second so you can grab it. And then over here, we're just increasing our exposure to blue because, you know, we have a blue bioluminescence. So obviously we're going to gravitate to a blue kind of toned light. And for area light down here, we're doing the same thing, just closing the radius, making sure this is sphere, and then transforming this. And that is, so the area light number 2 is going to control the back, as you can see, and the area light number 1 controls the front. So now that we have that, we can get on to our materials. So the ground is pretty straightforward. Honestly, it can be gray. You turn down the specular, you crank up the roughness, you turn the index of refraction down to 1, and you get something like that. Pretty simple. But now we have the fun part, which is the quartz. So stick with me on this. This is going to be a rough ride. We have to change the settings on the standard surface before we do anything regarding plugging in our materials. Once you finish fooling around with these settings, you should have something that kind of looks like this. Sorry if the screen is yellow. I've selected the wrong thing and I'm trying to click off of it. So we go into Quartz and we'll take a look at the settings. So base settings, you need a diffuse roughness of 1. Because it's a rock, it's unprocessed quartz. It's going to have some level of roughness. Metalness, very important to have because it has that, you know, glossy shine. Specular, you don't want too much, we don't want too little, we just kind of want an in-between amount. Index of refraction, surprisingly, unprocessed quartz, it does not have a high index of refraction. It is not glass. It is messy, it is rough, it has got like some texture to it, so you don't want a high index of refraction. And then you're going to play with your androscopy and your roughness and your rotation. You don't need this because we're not playing with roughness, so you can close coat. Transparency is where it's going to get tricky. Now, if you're going for a pink quartz, I recommend turning this pink. If you're going for a white quartz, like we are, like a gold, turn this white. Dispersion is going to sit around a nice 25, and a roughness, because it's a rock. Subsurface, this is what I recommend you do. So you can keep this at 0.5. Then you're going to do this as a 3.4. Index of refraction, thin film. The reason that this is a 1.4, not a 1.1 comparative to the subsurface or scattering, is because I want this as a thin film kind of to refract more on the edges, so that's good. But also this is a 0, so it's not really working, but if you want to use it, you can. This is the roughness. Index of refraction, I recommend you set it at. Opacity, this is not pure white. This is this color right here. White is, this is the value that we're working with. It's going to look like that. So once you have something that looks like this, now you are safe to plug in all of your other. Now, one of the other things that you're going to notice that why we are not doing a height map is because quartz has internal refractions. It does not have external contusions or roughnesses on the outside of it. You're going to have a smooth rock, but the inside is rough, so we don't need any height for that. Now, what we're going to do is go image. We're going to call this diffuse. Let's go to our comp. Okay. Plug this into base color. Hell yeah. Now we're going to do roughness. Roughness and spec. And then we're going to do... Oh, I accidentally grabbed the rat, not the XR. That may or may not have a difference. You might find out. Then we'll do our normal. Emission color. So emission color, pretty easy to understand. So we scroll down here and you can see emission 0.5. So that obviously color over here goes into here. This goes into here. Houdini is deciding what it wants to do with its life. We'll figure out that in a second. Now what we can do is plug this into roughness. Diffuse rough. Diffuse rough. Normal is going to go into normal. And now that we have all of this plugged in, those are just some good starting points to go for. We're going to continue on. All right, so that's looking way better. We'll look through camera. There we go. So this is what your quartz is going to look like. So another thing we're going to do is take the specular color and plug that into our diffuse, because we want it to have the same color. We're not going to see too much of a difference here, but that is something that we do want to connect. So you might see a more blue tinty glow or gold glow that you're seeing on some edges here. That's all good. So the next thing we're going to go down here is subsurface color and plug this into our diffuse. You're going to get a more, I would say, yellow toned. Now you're going to see some of your yellows coming in. Now, if you're still kind of like, I don't like it, I recommend dropping down these two ramps. What this is a, plug that into there, plug this into color. So what this is a ramp TBL. Keep that as a white setting, and then saturate is just going to reduce the saturation of the color, so the subsurface isn't going to be too saturated. It's going to have a nice kind of glow to it. So that is my first. Now the big hint into getting this to work is that you want to plug this roughness map into the subsurface radius. Now the trick here is that we have some really nice quartz happening in here. You don't necessarily have the greatest glow happening. Like, it doesn't look like it's glowing. We're missing a lot of texture. So what I'm going to do is drop down these 3 nodes here. What I've dropped down here is this hexagon tile that I'm multiplying this parameter, which I'm giving a multitude of 2. And what I'm going to do here is multiply this against my emission map. So we're going to get something a little bit more brighter. So you're going to have something that looks like this. At the same time that we're talking, it's probably a good idea to either color code everything that you've done to double check that it's working, or put them in network boxes, because that's a really good way to keep them and track of things in your scene. So this is going to be emission, and because it's more than one node, I'm going to use a network box. And now we're going to do the second part of playing with the emission. I'm going to drop down a Primvar reader, which I'm going to glow in. We're going to come back to that in a second. But this Primvar reader is going to read. We're going to have 3 here, place with put some cell noise in front of it, and multiply this Primvar reader with a multiply of glow. Multiply this, and then put that in there. You can kind of see this coming. So we're going to network box this. Just make sure everything's kind of tucked away easily. And you can kind of start to see our crystal forming. This is looking really, really cool. So what we have to do is actually, it all comes down to what's coming through this Primvar reader. So what we need to do here is set up this glow attribute on our object so, it can be passed through this material VOP correctly. So we need to go up here and we need to go over to our, rocks and make sure we're working with Primvar properly. Alrighty, so the next thing of our process is that we're going to zoom all the way up here where we have our RBD material fracture underneath our rocks. We are going to put down a color here, which sounds pretty ridiculous, but we're going to put a color here of concrete fracture inside. And basically these groups will appear when you put down your RBD material fracture. So you just want to select the inside groups. The next thing you're going to do is drop down an RBD noise. You're going to change this to color, float, and then make sure you have the concrete fracture inside selected. So there we go, and make sure you change this to multiply. Play with your ramp if you feel like it and your element size. Then you're going to make sure the color is divided by 2 here and that it equals glow. And then if we go all the way down here to our rock, we should get something that looks like this. Now we should get some glow. For whatever reason, Houdini has chosen Violence Night and I cannot understand why. So the reason why this wasn't looking right is because I didn't have the right file path to my textures. So make sure that if you have the emission coming into here, you select the emission texture that you have up here. Otherwise, nothing will work. So, as we can see here, our emission is looking kind of sad. So maybe we should double or triple, our float default, just to get a little bit more punch in there. And as you can see, our emission is looking pretty good on our rock. But what if we wanted some emission on the rock itself? We also have probably too much transparency going on, because you can see right through that rock right there, which is not a good sign. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go transmission. We have a transmission of 0.1, and we're going to make that a little larger. We're going to plug that into our specular. If we do that, 2 things will happen. 1, this will get more translucent. Drop down to ramp. We're using, no, that's subsurface radius. We are looking for a transmission. So ramp PLBDAR into there. We do 1, a pure value of 1. Still not totally looking at the way that I'd like it here. We're losing a lot of transparency. So let's go over here to our opacity. Let's go check in our opacity settings. We're going to scroll all the way down to the bottom. You can see opacity thin walled. So let's grab our opacity and plug it into let's let this render and cook for a little bit, because sometimes you gotta let Houdini do that. If you don't do it, then yeah, it's not gonna look great. So I think that's actually looking pretty good. Like, we're seeing some thickness starting to happen here. It's translucent, but it's not. It's shiny, but it's not. It's got that kind of gold refraction to it. It's looking pretty cool. I kind of went with that more alien blue glow constantly through the structure. So we're going to revisit our blue glow luminescence. So what I'm going to do over here is go to our parameter 2 over here, do maybe 5, and there we go. Okay, so now we're starting to see some really cool condensed areas in the structure. Let's try and get some glow into the base here. So the way we can do that is jumping up, going to our quartz model, and basically copy and pasting our glow over here. But what I would like to do over here, we don't need this, but what we do need is to take away these inside groups because we're not fracturing. Let's make this element size bigger. Maybe something like that. Let's go down to the bottom. Doing that red, I'm not sure if I'm a fan of that. Red, get rid of that. Okay, perfect. Looks a lot more natural. We've got that clear, precise glow going through the rock. We've got kind of like a natural bioluminescent structure to it. That is looking really good. We're going to let this render out completely or get it to a good sense where we can say we're happy with it. But overall, this is how you'd start to create quartz and Houdini. That's about it for me. This is how you would create, your quartz model in Houdini, and turn off all those so you can see just the rock itself. And that's about it. And I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. My name is Kate, and I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye!